Started this series, we thought December would be a good time to do a year in review and to talk about the upcoming year. And we asked Ben Kuo to come, be brave enough to stand up and do that. So he did it last December. It was a big hit. I can already tell you we're going to do it again next December if Ben's willing to do it. But most importantly, I want to hear what he said last year about 2016 and how close he came. And if you've never been to SoCal Tech and you're at all interested in what's going on in tech in Southern California, Ben does it great. He does email blasts whenever there's news in the area. I encourage you to sign up for his email. They're free, and the service is very reasonably priced. If you're looking for a job or you want to know what's going on with venture capital or startups, SoCal Tech is a great resource. So, with that, Ben Kuo.
Hi everyone. Whoa, hello. Echo. Hey everyone, it's great to be here tonight and thanks for having me. And I did this last year talking about what was going on in Southern California. And so I did not check my own results, but I did put together a bunch of slides here about what's going on here in the region. So I was going to talk first about funding, and if anyone's, actually let's see here. If anyone is interested in what's going on in the region in general, you need to look at see what is going on in the funding picture. Now, how many people here have been to SoCal Tech? So those of you who haven't, what we do is every day we send out an email and we post news items all through the day on what's going on in terms of who's being funded, who's being acquired, what big business deals are happening. We have a big database in the back end of all the deals for the last, I think it's almost been 20 years now in terms of information, and who's funding who the CEO is, who their attorneys are, who their PR firm is, and so on. And so we try to keep track of what's going on, and one big piece there is funding. So this is a little picture that I picked off the internet. And I was thinking that these startups aren't actually going to go very far because they didn't get a lot of money. So biggest VC deal. So I took a look at this first from a Southern California perspective. So we cover from Santa Barbara to San Diego, and I think it's useful to look at this this whole region as a whole. So when you talk about Silicon Valley, it's not just San Francisco, it's not just Palo Alto, it is the whole region. So I think of us, even though a lot of people go, hey, we want to be just Santa Monica, or we just want to be San Diego, you got to look at this whole region as an entire area where there's funding happening. And part of that is the companies involved are all over the map. Service providers in the region may have clients in San Diego, may have clients in Santa Barbara, and it's all tied together, like Mike talked about, as being a startup community. And we have a startup community, many startup communities who are all tied together in Southern California. So if you look at Southern California as a whole, these are, in order of value, the biggest venture capital deals. And most of you, if you have an idea what's going on in the world, will know Snapchat. How many people here have a Snapchat account? It's always fun. And they had actually two big rounds. And interestingly enough, if you look through the whole year, they raised $1.8 billion in a round, which is more money than I think the area gets generally in a quarter. And there's a long list of investors there. I will have you note that all those investors in Snapchat are very large venture firms or public investors. You'll know that there's not a lot of Southern California folks in there, if anyone at all, and that's because the valuations are so high for Snapchat. The next on the list is actually a San Diego company, is Human Longevity, $220 million. That's a lot of money. You'll see through this list, actually there's a lot of biotech companies. So if you're talking about the venture business, nowadays, when you're starting up an internet startup, you generally don't need to raise $220 million. Back in the days when the 1 1/4 was like the capital of electronic startups, you need to do a chip. Yeah, you need a lot of money because it costs you $100 million to get that chip made. Nowadays, not so much. So the big deals are going to be biotech or big consumer startups. Snapchat was the number 3 venture investment, believe it or not. Orexogen's also San Diego, a biotech company. Sorrento, 150 million, biotech company. Logic Monitor is in Santa Barbara. How many people know about Logic Monitor? That's interesting. So they do cloud management software, IT infrastructure. Big player in the space. They got $130 million, which is a giant round. And it's interesting to me that nobody here has heard of them. They got it from one single investor, Providence Strategic Growth. And you'll notice in this list the number of people, and in fact, you've got to go down to number 7, which is Thrive Market. How many people know about Thrive Market? They're a Santa Monica company. They're kind of like Whole Foods online with a membership. And they got $110 million. And that's the first time you see any Southern California venture investors. That's Crosscut and Graycroft are the only ones there. So, it used to be you would look at the local investors to see who's leading deals. The interesting thing that you get out of this picture is that our local investors are not leading the deals, the big deals. Cylance is in Irvine. They are in cybersecurity, $100 million. And the other thing you might just add, looking at this as a whole, is there's a lot of private equity. Big rounds right now are private equity companies. And I would also say this, Wall Street firms, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, they invest like private equity firms. Big checks, right? They're not going to write you a $5 million check for your round. Sorry, it's got to be $100 million. So that's kind of the biggest deals in Southern California in general. And I'm going to flip over here to the next page, which is the right key. The 1 1/4. So this is what I think most of the people here care about. And you'll notice that our deals are different. So you'll notice that our deals are not $1 billion. Our deals, the biggest deals we have are in the biggest one is the Logic Monitor, $130 million. But everything else is in the 10, 30, $50 million. Procore, how many people have heard of Procore? So Procore is in Santa Barbara. They make construction management software, almost like a CRM tool for if you're building a building. So if you drive around Thousand Oaks, actually, you'll see they have signs up at the different construction sites, and a lot of them have Procore, powered by Procore on there. And they deal with who's coming in today with the tile, who's got the lumber, and how much did that cost, and the accounting and all that. They just took $50 million, I think last week, from one investor again, and that round, that $50 million round, actually made them a unicorn. So how many people here know what a unicorn is? They're worth more, so their valuation is more than $1 billion. Software company, very enterprise, no consumer there. Invoca, how many people have heard of Invoca? Okay, so they do call attribution for advertising. So if you ever have an ad, you see an ad on TV or something that says, call 800 something, 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 they do affiliate marketing. So it used to be that was just random. Nowadays, there's people who generate leads for other people. It's just like clicking on a website, and they do all the tracking if you do it through a phone call. They got $30 million. And Rincon is a Santa Barbara kind of local investor. But if you look at and Upfront's pretty local as well, Santa Monica. But if you look at the investors again, Excel, that's a pretty good firm. Morgan Stanley, typo. Salesforce, StepStone. So interesting investors. Impact Radius is also in Santa Barbara. They're also in the affiliate marketing space. $30 million. How many people have heard of Holler? Holler's in Sherman Oaks. So I count them kind of the 1 1/4, bringing Santa Barbara down to into the valley a little bit. They do a dollar store online, believe it or not, $30 million. But if you look at the investors, it's always interesting to look at the investors. is Kleiner Perkins. If you ever see Kleiner Perkins at a deal, it's usually a really good deal. If you look at the companies that actually go to IPO, the companies that are backing them tend to be Kleiner, Excel, and so if they're investing in a company, there's usually something going on. Lightspeed usually goes along with Kleiner. $30 million for selling dollar item kind of like items online. So the reason they're getting that money is because they've got revenues. They're selling a lot of product. Hixme, Tipalti. How many people have heard of Tipalti? They're actually partially in Agura. If you look at their website and you say, oh, where's this company based? They say Palo Alto, but a bunch of their team is here in Agura. They came out of, some of the guys came out of Ixia, believe it or not. And they're actually doing accounting software. Nothing to do with hardware, but tech talent everywhere. HD Data, Sienna's is right here. And that is a pretty big deal in terms of the life sciences. So that's kind of the deals in the one-on-one corridor. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little farther along here. So I would say one interesting thing that you're going to see about these deals is demonstrated in this crowd is a lot of people don't know who these companies are. When you go to Silicon Beach down in Santa Monica, generally people know what the companies do because they're so consumer. And what's happened on the one-on-one quarters, we have a lot of great companies, but what they're doing is very vertical, very specialized that people aren't generally aware of them, even though these guys are getting a lot of money. $30 million nowadays is quite a bit of money. So let's talk about exits next. And I like this sign because someone managed to find, I think there's a subway in New York where it says exit and 2 Street on the same sign. So what are the biggest exits in Southern California? And there's a very long list. The good news is we have had a great exit year. So I don't know if anyone knows Mark Sustert up front. At the very beginning of the year, he posted something on his blog. He's a lot of people pay attention as one of the big VCs here. And he said, this is going to be the worst year ever, going to be a reset, exits aren't going to happen. And I have the counterproof to that, which is we have had a very good exit year in Southern California, and in particular, the one-on-one corridor. So I put up Match.com. They're actually not based here, but they had an IPO, and it was entirely on the strength of one thing, which was Tinder. So I won't have everyone raise their hand if they're on Tinder. Probably beyond most of the age group here, but Tinder is swipe left or swipe right. I don't know which way is which if you like someone, and that has completely changed the dating scene. I bet you all the college students in here are on there, and they went IPO entirely on the strength of Tinder, and Tinder was developed in Santa Monica. Vizio, $2 billion deal. They're actually in Irvine, acquired by a Chinese company. Nant Health, which is Patrick Soon-Shiong, who's a billionaire, a biotech billionaire. This is not his first company. They actually had the biggest IPO of a biotech ever. So historically, over all the time, they've had the biggest IPO in terms of where they are. $1.56 billion going out in the market. And Blackline is here. How many people know about Blackline? So they started in Agura. I think they're now officially in Woodland Hills. They do accounting software. If you want to talk about the most obscure area is how many people know what a financial close is? Yeah, so there's very few people who know what it is, but basically every month when companies have to do their financial statements, they have to figure out, does the bank statement match up with all the stuff in their accounting system? And there's a lot of other stuff around there. And they just automate that. It used to be all stuff they used to do in Excel. And they have so many customers. It's a very, kind of dry, boring area. They actually managed to go IPO, and again, another billion dollar IPO. I think their first 5 hires were readers of my newsletter. Anyway, so they are pretty much a one-on-one corridor company. Dollar Shave Club. I bet you people know about Dollar Shave Club, right? So Dollar Shave Club was $1 billion. Even though that's probably the biggest visibility in terms of Southern California, you'll already see that there's a bunch of companies in other areas who actually did pretty well. but people don't really aware of. And that is the first company I would say that I think has gone IPO based on their viral video. I mean, they have a good business too, but that actually has been a great success in terms of the consumer space. And then Trade Desk. How many people know about the Trade Desk? So the Trade Desk is in Ventura. How many people knew that we had an IPO in Ventura this year? How many people did not know we had an IPO in Ventura, right? So the Trade Desk is an internet advertising company. They almost had $1 billion market cap at their IPO, and they were in the Ventura Ventures incubator. So you're talking about incubation spaces like here, and Greg and Mike have got a great thing going on here. They started out just like the companies here with a couple of desks, and they grew from a couple of desks to an office. Then they got an entire floor, and then they eventually had to go find their own building because they have 100 some employees now. So I think that's the biggest success out of a startup incubator in Ventura County ever so far. And maybe Greg will have one too here. And I'll get to talk about that next year. So that is only page one. We had so many, so in prior years, if you'd asked me to do this, usually it's one page are the exits. I have actually 3 pages. We're not going to talk about all the companies, but there have been a lot. Impinj is a semiconductor company. The great claim to fame there is the original investors invested in Impinj, I think 14 years ago. So most venture funds have a 10-year lifespan, and these guys went beyond the lifespan so far that they eventually got an exit. And I bet you actually Mike mentioned Brad Feld. Brad Feld was one of the original investors in this company in their original fund. I think this is 5 funds ago. So anyway, that's an interesting story there. Everbridge is in Glendale. They do emergency notification services. So if you're on your phone, you get an alert saying you got to go run and hide because someone's gonna whatever. That's their systems, or that's what they do. Also those phone calls you get from your kid's school. Fulgent Genomics. This is an interesting one. The IPO in September. Ming Hsieh was the 100% owner of that. So you think that a venture-backed company is more likely to go IPO. He owned 100% of the company when it went IPO. And he previously had made money at selling Cogent, a company, to 3M. So just because you've got venture money doesn't necessarily mean you go IPO. In fact, you can actually go IPO even as a sole founder of a company. So that's fun. Kurion, if you haven't heard of their Irvine, they are, everyone remember the tsunami in Japan? Nuclear disasters. So they started, believe it or not, and they got their first funding round about 3 months before that happened. And they got, I think, an investment of $10 or $15 million. And that's the only investment they've ever gotten since then, because they were so well timed that, a big natural disaster, and they did all the water cleanup at Fukushima. And so then they were acquired by a big energy company for $350 million. So actually, sorry, they raised less than $5 million. So those investors, I think, did pretty well. Touch Commerce is here in Agura. How many people know about Touch Commerce? So Touch Commerce does customer service software. So if you ever go to a website and up a little box says, hey, how can we help you today? They do a lot of the software that did that and automated that, and then eventually you get handed off to someone who wants to help you or sell you something. Arion, how many people have heard of Arion? Anybody? They're Santa Barbara company. And again, $100 million to Juniper Networks is not a bad exit. And they didn't raise very much money in the networking space. And they are one of the big exits here in Southern California. By the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt. So I'm not going to go all of these, but there's a lot more. So usually it's 1 page, and this year it was 3 pages. So it's been a phenomenal year. So no matter what people tell you about where's economy and all that, it ends up that we have had the best exit year in Southern California, and it's actually been a huge year for the 101 corridor with 2 IPOs here in the immediate area. it's actually been phenomenal. So this is, everyone's hunting for unicorns. And who are the unicorns that are coming up? Well, there's a few in the queue that people know about. However, there's probably another 6 or 7 companies, I think, that are prepping for an IPO, especially since the markets have been doing so well. Not yesterday, but last month, I forgot to edit my slide. Snapchat has filed for an IPO, and we haven't seen the actual numbers off that yet, but they filed. Jam City, how many people know what Jam City does? No one knows what Jam City does? Any of the students know what Jam City is? So how many people play mobile video games? Right? So what's the so I believe one of their titles is Candy Crush. They do a lot of those mobile games. Doing great. They have $400 million in revenues from all you guys clicking on buy it rather than playing, it says, to get the next level, buy something. They're making $400 million a year, probably more now, all from you clicking on those buttons. They are due to do an IPO filing anytime soon. Honest Company, Natural Products Company, they are looking to be bought. That could be a IPO. It could also be a flop. So we'll see where that one goes. It's very interesting how some of these companies will push it to the end, and they either are going to get bought, they're going to do an IPO, even though they're losing money, or they go south. So it's very interesting. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of other companies now with the market doing as well as it is that are probably thinking about it. I would say that 2 of the companies on our list earlier, I'll make my prediction, though I don't know if I'll be right. Back here. So I will predict that Logic Monitor, Procore, and Invoca are likely to be filing IPOs in the next year and a half. That'll be my prediction. I don't know about if they will or not, but so when they file, you can say, hey, Ben said that they would file an IPO in December of 2016. So what does this say about the 101 corridor? Obviously here, everyone here is looking at that, is we do have our share of exits. So as much as people wring their hands about, hey, does the 101 corridor have it? And I know that if anyone's been to the 805 startups here, Alon's brought up some investors. And a lot of investors go, oh, you guys just don't have it. There's not going on here. And I think we've proven them quite wrong, because half the exits in the region have been in our area. So big IPO, Blackline, big IPO, the Trade Desk, 2 big acquisitions, Touch Commerce and Arian. They are all local companies. And so when people say, you guys can't do an IPO, you guys can't create a big company, it's not true. And in fact, these are just this year. As you go over the past few years, we've had a lot of great exits. I know a lot of people know about the lynda.com story. There's a lot of companies like that who've done well. And funding also has been fairly good. If you look at the size of the deals, it hasn't been too bad. I do have to say the seed level deals are not very high in our area for whatever reason. That said, there's a lot of companies that have done well without that seed funding. And I think the rule is, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to make it succeed, you make it happen no matter what, even if you can't find the funding. So I think that's usually true of a lot of these guys and gals. So what does this mean overall as a region, from Santa Barbara to San Diego? We kind of know what we're doing. And I run across a lot of people who haven't been in this industry. I've been doing this for, I tell people, 1,000 internet years. I'm embarrassed to say I think it's probably close to 20 years now. And in an era where you're old if you've been doing it for longer than 6 months. Anyway, we do know what we're doing. This is not the first time we've had a lot of exits. This is not the first wave of great startups. the people who are getting funding, the people who are exiting, a lot of them are serial entrepreneurs, and this is their second, third, or fourth time around. So we know what we're doing. It's not, hey, you guys are the brand new guys on the block. It's not, oh, Silicon Beach is finally made it. No, this is the fourth or fifth time we've done it. Other things, amount of funding does not predict success. If you look at the list of the exits, there's a lot of companies there who raised $5 million or $10 million and had a huge exit. It is not how much money you've raised. I don't have them up here, but I can give you plenty of counterexamples of companies who've raised $100 million and nothing to show for it. So, when you're thinking about a company as an entrepreneur, think about how can you make a good company, not how much money you can raise. Experience helps. I know we're in the Hub 101, a lot of new entrepreneurs, but it really helps to have a little bit of experience in your industry. You'll notice the companies that are successful, if you look through them all, they tend to have been in the industry, they know the customers, they have an idea how things works. None of those companies with big exits are, oh, hey, I got a new mobile app that I just thought of yesterday because it's a better Snapchat or a better Tinder or whatever. These are real problems people are solving. So can't predict the industry. If you'd asked me, I should go look at my slides from last year and see what industries I predicted. But they're all over the map. There's who would think that accounting software is the hottest area for an IPO, right? I don't think anyone would think that, right? And who would say, people were saying, hey, it's going to be, the big exits are going to be in Hollywood, Hollywood content startups. I have yet to see giant, Hollywood content exits. The exits here, VC is not necessary. Venture capital is great because you can accelerate your company, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get an exit, and you don't have to have VC to get a good exit. So again, when you're an entrepreneur, think about your business first, and capital will help it along. So, and exits can be very, very hard. I didn't go through all of them, but there's some companies that have been around for a while, and it took them a long time to get through. Every investor I talk to, and I talk to investors all day, every day, and they said the number one thing you got to understand is you got to push through for a very long time, figure it out, make it happen. You can't give up because it may take a lot longer than you think. The market's not right, the industry doesn't develop as quickly, you didn't quite have the formula right, and a lot of it is persistence. I mean, you have to be going the right direction, but you also have to have ability to stick it through. So lessons for the 101 corridor. Think different. So I would say, looking at this list, you need to think differently. Don't just think, hey, I'm going to be the next consumer smartphone app. If you look at it, think vertical. All the successful companies on my list that have really good exits have been very vertically focused. So software companies that are serving the construction industry, software company doing accounting, companies that are doing something very specific to an industry that there's something defensive that not everybody else is going for. It's not the last year I did remember that the big trend was the next Uber or the next Airbnb. And you'll note that none of these companies that have that success are the next Uber or the next Airbnb, right? So you need to think different about what is there a real problem with. Doesn't have to be sexy to be successful. A lot of successful companies, obviously on our list, are not doing anything that's very sexy. Experience in the industry matters. I mentioned this before, but it really helps that you know what you're doing in an industry that you understand. And I know that's sometimes very hard because I think everybody has a tendency to go, oh, hey, I know how to make a better, whatever widget. But if you've never done that before, it's a lot harder. So look outside the usual investors. The people who are funding now, if you look at the list, are very varied. And I think some of that is from the verticals. So a lot of these companies are, if you are developing software for customer service, or if you're developing an app for dentists, there's specific investors who will invest in that who aren't the guys next door necessarily. So, think about who might be there. And you also notice the private equity guys, when you're big enough, are funding a lot of stuff. So those guys are definitely accelerating a lot of the companies around here. And then the other thing I can say is we can have unicorns too. I didn't bring the whole list of all the unicorns in the Ventura County, Santa Barbara, along the 101 corridor, but we have our unicorns, but our unicorns tend to exit rather than just getting a lot of press. So let's see here. So questions? Anyone have questions? What's going on? So local VCs are interesting. So I would say the last year local VCs have not been investing because of valuation. And so everyone here is familiar with valuation. That's how much a company is worth when a VC invests and say, are you worth $2 million, $5 million? And our local VCs have always been a little bit shy about investing in companies at high valuation. In fact, I know a bunch of guys who were talking to Snapchat on their first few rounds, and what they told me is they go, it may be a great company, but we can't justify investing in that company because they said they're worth $4 billion, right? And I think we tend to have more value investors here. So that's part of it. So the other thing is we don't necessarily have very early VCs. We have some early VCs, but some of our guys want to see a little bit more traction. So they want to be the series. They'll be a Series A guy, Series B guy, but maybe not the seed guys. Maybe they will be, but they're a little more conservative on that. They want to see some revenues and funding before they fund you, rather than just an idea. Other questions? Yeah, so the question is, how much will crowdfunding impact investing in technology? It's interesting, there's a lot of crowdfunding efforts going on right now, and there's still a little bit of, and probably the attorneys in the room probably know better than I do on all the rules around crowdfunding. And so those things haven't been quite settled by the SEC, so there's still a little gray area there. It's an option, and I do see companies looking at it. It's probably even harder than angel funding because you're not dealing with a dozen investors, you're dealing with hundreds of investors. But it's an option. I do want to note, I think last year for people here, I did mention that Kickstarter was the great big thing. I still see a lot of projects for Kickstarter. The hard part there, as I noted, I think last year, is there's a lot of projects who look for funding who can't execute. And so I get a lot of people forwarding me going, hey, you should invest in this Kickstarter project, or cover our company. And you go, oh, well, when's the last time you made a drone that could fly, automated, blah, blah. Oh, no, we just think it's a great idea, right? And you go, when's the last time you built something? And they can't say when they did. So there's a lot of projects like that. Go ahead.
I heard on Work Radio interview with Indiegogo, and they picked 4 different equity crowdfunding companies, all different, as kind of a starting point. And that's kind of the way they did things at the beginning too, is let's handpick things and make sure we're successful before we then open the floodgates.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Crowdfunding is starting, but it's not quite there. Questions? Joel.
So you've probably heard about this $2-3 trillion that's being held offshore by U.S. corporations, and apparently a high percentage of those companies are high-tech companies that are export leaders. And if the corporate tax code is changed and that money comes back, or a significant part of it comes back into the country, do you have any sense of how that might impact either investment or exits for some of the companies that you're following?
Yeah, it's a good question on investment. Since the big companies are not huge investors and they tend to make very strategic bets, I don't think it's going to influence funding, and it probably won't influence us very much. On the exit side, however, I think that has a lot of potential. There's, whenever large companies are trying to extend, they often will buy companies rather than try to develop themselves. And I think we've seen a lot of success there. If you look at the exits, actually up in Santa Barbara, the number of cloud companies, last year, not this year, I think they had companies acquired by Red Hat and acquired by Cisco and acquired by, who else, another cloud, IBM. There's a bunch. All of those are buy it rather than build it deals. And that's driven us a lot. Southern California, sometimes people don't like it, but we do have a lot of great hits in terms of companies developing great technology and being acquired by a big corporate suitor. So, yeah. Question?
Now that we've had an uptick in the markets, a lot of investors have been sitting on the sidelines investing in the markets because the returns weren't there, and they were investing in ventures like these. So now that we're having what could be a longer upturn in the markets, will it affect the funding of startups?
Not so much. So the funny thing is, and there's a few ex-VCs in this room who know this better than I do, but when VCs invest, they invest for the long term, and they don't really pay attention to the markets. However, when the markets are good, people tend to feel good. And so I think the VCs tend to do a little bit more investment when the funds are doing. The investment mix, I don't think changes by the market so much. It does change as VC have been having a good few years, because then it's harder to raise money. But it's not like VC is such a small portion of their portfolio at those limited partners that the market being up or down doesn't make a big difference. At least I don't know. Maybe some of the ex-VCs want to chime in. Okay. Hey,
I've got one.
Okay.
So what I remember from last year is it wasn't that you just mentioned companies using Uber's business model, but you used the term Uber for X. It was the first time I heard it anywhere. Right. And as the year went on, I kept hearing Uber for this, Uber for that, and the most ridiculous one was Uber for manservants. If you go manservants.co for $100 a month, you can rent, or an hour, you can rent your own manservant. When you get to the point where the ideas just seem over the top ridiculous and you're looking at all kinds of unicorns, are we getting close to the point where we're in a valuation bubble where the bubble could burst and we could be starting all over again?
So, that's the one fortunate thing for the entire Southern California is we have avoided the valuation bubble, except for Snapchat, I'll have to say. Last year when people were talking about funding and bubbles, and we were talking, looking at our companies, none of the companies here, if you talk to the VCs now, are of bubble quality, right? There's nobody whose valuations have been driven so high that people go, what the heck is that? That has been a big problem in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, and Silicon Valley. We never got it, and I think partially is the guys down here who have been in venture are old hands at it. They are not, spring chickens with a lot of money out of Stanford. If you go to the Bay Area and talk to the Sand Hill Road guys, there's a lot of new guys, right? They just got their MBA, someone hired them. They go, oh yeah, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And down here, there's a lot of wounds. These guys have had, they got bruises and bumps. They went through 98, they went through 2002, they went through whatever it is. And so they go, we're not doing that again. So we've been pretty lucky. I don't think, even if there's a giant crash in the market in terms of funding, at least based on all the companies I've talked to, we haven't had the same kind of issues.
Cool.
What's an ex-VC? There's a few folks who were in venture capital, part of funds. Yeah. There's a lot. There's a. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, there's always people who go do something else. They join an operational company, or they decide not to raise a fund, or they made a lot of money and decided it was it. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Joel.
One last question. In your database, you have the information to actually calculate the multiples that investors received on these exits, don't you? Because you have all the RAM.
Yes, I do.
But you don't put them up in your slide presentation.
Yeah, I don't. So this is so once upon a time, and I have a job section which is not too active on my site right now. For some reason, people aren't posting a lot of jobs. But people ask me, hey, why don't you do a resume database? And the thing is, this community is so small that even if you strip the names off of people, you'll know who it is, right? You'll know what company they're working for. And that's the same thing with these investments. Some of the funds are not doing so great. And it doesn't help us as a community to go, oh, look how bad those guys are doing. One thing I haven't run, for example, is incubators were really, really big in the last few years. And if you run the numbers against incubators, some of them look very, 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 very bad. There's an incubator in town. I will not mention the person because they're a great guy. And they made millions of dollars in investments in dozens and dozens of companies. And exactly one of them got funding from a venture capitalist. And there's someone who supports the community, so we try not to embarrass people.
So this is just an observation. So you go to Sand Hill Road, and it's like going to Napa Valley. You can just sit there and you can say there's Excel and there's Kleiner and it's like up and down the road. It's every imaginable VC, right? And you can almost count how much it's worth. This one does billions and billions, and it all adds up to gazillions of dollars. LA doesn't appear to have a community or a place or that kind of, let's call it penetration. At the same time, there are tons of tech companies that are sprouting up every day with, the likes of Snapchat, and Google moved into Main Street, and then a lot of, smaller ones that are looking for seed money and A rounds and whatever. And you've been around this area for as long as you have. What is the reason, other than like a Mark Suster, why isn't there a more vibrant community? It just blows my mind.
So I think there's actually quite a vibrant community in terms of startups, but funding sources is a little less. And that's I think more just an artifact of the fact that the big funds who have had success have been in the Bay Area. There have been a lot of funds that actually have been both in the Bay Area and Southern California. And people don't realize that. And it's pretty funny because, for example, the guys at March Capital Partners now, they just raised a new fund. They used to be at Clearstone. And those guys were in Santa Monica. Most of the guys were in Santa Monica. They had one guy up in Sand Hill Road just to be up there. And they would get pitches from somebody a block away in Santa Monica that was sent to their guy in Sand Hill Road. And they go, well, you could just talk to our guys the next building over. And it's like, there's a disconnect. And people just automatically assume it's like, hey, you want to go to, you go to finance, you go to New York. I think it's partially what it is.
I want to add one more part to this question, because I think it's important.
Right.
Is VCs want to be close to their startups. I've heard this. So when we were raising money up north, they wanted to get somebody to do a syndicated round
Right.
with somebody in LA, so that they were somebody local. So again, it goes back to, you've got all this tech activity, all these young companies, lots of brilliant ideas and whatever, and there's no place to get that, other than like Tech Angels or Karatsu or whatever.
Yeah, there's some of it. So I'll say that the successful companies do it no matter where they are. And they, the VCs who only want a local presence just miss out on those companies. The most successful companies I run to, so if anyone knows Frank Adante at Rubicon Project, so Rubicon Project did very well in the advertising space. They were here in LA. His two previous companies were moved to Silicon Valley because of the exact reason you said. They said, hey, we think you do better in Silicon Valley. He did better with Rubicon here, And he specifically did that. He says, because I got moved and it sucked, and we couldn't recruit employees. It was too expensive. The average turnover, I don't know what it is now, but it used to be 6 months. And you'd hire somebody in for a company in Silicon Valley, and 6 months later they're gone. And I don't know about you, but every job I've been in, I kind of know where the bathroom is by 6 months. I don't really know what's going on in the company, and that's the average. So that's what the problem they're running into. And so you want to build a good company, and sometimes you have to just say, hey, we're doing it here, and this is how we're doing it, and there's a lot of advantages here. So
I'd add that the Sand Hill Road VCs all have private jets, and you can probably fly from Palo Alto to Santa Monica faster than you can drive from Pasadena to Santa Monica. So, okay, let's give Ben a round of applause. Thank you very much. So, we realized we can't give Ben the same gift every year. We gave him a blanket last year, so here's a 101 hoodie.